In 2013, someone found wild beavers living on the River Otter in Devon, England, the first wild breeding beavers in the country in 400 years. Nobody knew exactly how they got there, but scientists decided not to remove them, and what followed changed British conservation history. These beavers built dams, transformed a river, and forced the government to make a decision nobody expected. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a handful of escaped animals rewired an entire ecosystem, and why England is now letting a once-extinct species live wild again for the first time in centuries. Let's go back 400 years, to when beavers still called Britain home. Eurasian beavers were once native and widespread across Britain, hunted for their fur, their meat, and a secretion called castoreum used in perfumes and medicine. By the 20th century, not a single wild beaver remained anywhere in England, Wales, or Scotland. Then in 2013, wild beavers turned up on the River Otter in Devon, breeding without any help from humans at all. Government policy at the time technically required removing them, since they were considered an escaped, non-native animal. Instead, Devon Wildlife Trust proposed something different, a formal 5-year scientific study called the River Otter Beaver Trial. That trial began in 2015, overseen scientifically by Professor Richard Brazier's team at the University of Exeter. What happened next surprised even the scientists who were watching closely for exactly this kind of change. Over the trial period, the beaver families expanded and built roughly 28 dams across different tributaries of the river. Those dams impounded almost 2 kilometers of waterway, turning simple, degraded channels into a mosaic of new ponds and wetlands. Researchers using tools like Ecosolice's Biodiversity Quality Calculator documented the transformation from dense willow scrub into varied wetland habitat. That new habitat mixed pools, shrub, deadwood, and wet grassland, supporting a far richer range of insect and plant life than before. Species surveys recorded measurable increases in water voles, snipe, and teal in the areas the beavers had newly flooded. Beavers are formally classified as a keystone species, an ecosystem engineer whose dam building reshapes hydrology in ways that ripple out to everything else. That single classification explains why one animal's behavior could touch so many unrelated species at once. But the ecological story is only half of what made this trial so significant to British scientists. The dams also slowed the speed of floodwater moving downstream, offering natural flood protection to some flood-prone communities further down the river. At the same time, the dams trapped sediment that would otherwise wash into tributaries, improving water quality and reducing topsoil erosion. That matches decades of similar research from continental Europe, where beaver dams have documented water storage and flood buffering effects for years. Still, not everything about the trial went smoothly, and some of the friction came from people who lived closest to the river. Some beaver dams caused localized flooding on agricultural land, creating real problems for the farmers whose fields sat nearby. Fisheries scientists also raised genuine concerns about dams disrupting migration routes for salmon and trout, a contested issue even among beaver researchers. To manage that friction, teams used mitigation techniques like lowering dam height or installing flow control devices nicknamed beaver deceivers. A review submitted to the Angling Trust noted the River Otter trial, while positive overall, was too narrow in scope to settle every national question about beavers and fish. So after 5 years of monitoring, what did the actual science conclude when all the evidence was finally weighed together? In August 2020, the official Science and Evidence Report, led by Professor Brazier's team, found the ecosystem and social benefits outweighed the financial costs. But the report also flagged an important equity problem hidden inside those numbers. The people who benefited most from flood protection lived downstream, while the people who bore most of the cost, mainly farmers, lived upstream. Based on that evidence, England's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs formally announced the beavers could remain permanently on the River Otter. That decision marked the first legally sanctioned reintroduction of a formerly extinct native mammal species in English history. And the ripple effects of that single decision spread far beyond one river in Devon. The trial's publicity is widely credited with accelerating beaver reintroduction efforts across the rest of the United Kingdom. Licensed and unlicensed beaver populations were established in Scotland, including sites at Knapdale and on the River Tay. The Welsh Beaver Project began its own feasibility work soon after, inspired directly by what happened on the River Otter. British researchers now estimate wild beaver numbers in England at roughly 400 to 500 individuals. Scotland's population is larger, numbering in the low thousands, though still modest compared to the rest of the continent. Continental Europe's wild beaver population has rebounded from fewer than 1,200 individuals around 1900 to over 1.5 million today. That recovery is considered one of the most dramatic conservation comebacks of any mammal species anywhere in Europe. England's few hundred beavers are a tiny fraction of that number, but they represent something Europe already proved was possible. What makes the river otter story different is that it started completely by accident, not as a planned government reintroduction. A handful of animals that likely escaped or were illegally released ended up rewriting official British wildlife policy within 7 years. Scientists spent 5 years measuring dams, water voles, snipe, sediment, and farmland flooding just to answer one simple question. Do the benefits of letting a once-extinct species return outweigh the costs to the people living closest to it? The answer, according to Professor Brazier's team, was yes, but with real costs that fell unevenly on upstream landowners. That nuance rarely makes it into headlines, but it is exactly the kind of detail that decides real conservation policy. 28 dams, 2 kilometers of new wetland, and 400 years of absence, all reversed inside a single river valley. Water voles, snipe, and teal moved back into habitat that simply did not exist before the beavers arrived. Farmers dealt with flooded fields, fisheries scientists raised real concerns, and none of that got ignored in the final report. That is the part most viral beaver stories leave out. The friction was measured honestly instead of smoothed over for a happy ending. So the real lesson from the river otter is not just that beavers came back, it is how carefully Britain decided to let them stay. Which raises an obvious question. If one accidental release changed national policy this fast, what happens when reintroduction is planned on purpose? Because Scotland and Wales are now asking exactly that question, using the river otter data as their starting evidence. There is a second, even bigger reintroduction story unfolding right now in Scotland, one involving a far more controversial animal than a beaver. We are covering that story next, and it involves opposition far stronger than anything the river otter beavers ever faced. Go watch that video next, because what is happening in Scotland right now makes this river trial look simple by comparison.